to order and ask our general counsel to verify a meeting quorum.
Mr. Chairman, a quorum is present.
Thank you very much. We'll move to item number 3, matters subsequent to posting the agenda, and no such items have been identified. So I'll move to item number 4, public comment, and invite any member of the public to address the board concerning matters not on the agenda. Any requests from the public?
No hands are currently raised, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just, before we get to the consent calendar, I'm going to just use my prerogative to recognize our 2 newest members, Clean Power San Francisco and Valley Clean Energy, Barbara and Mitch. Welcome to CC Power. And we'll have a chance to maybe chat on item 6F, just in terms of individual member items. So with that, I'll move to item number 5, consent agenda. We have the minutes on the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve? And if someone's going to make that motion, I do have a typo associated with my name that I have already brought to Chris's attention. So if we could have the motion include that.
I'll motion to approve and correct that typo that Gorish mentioned.
I'll second.
Thank you. Take a vote.
And members of the board, the corrected item on the 3rd to last line of the minutes is reflected there. The correction that's referenced by the chair. And a voice vote for the approval of the minutes is acceptable.
Okay, so anyone not in favor, please say so, or if you want to abstain. Not hearing anything, it's passed unanimously. And
sorry, Chair, I'll abstain. I was not part of that meeting.
Okay, thank you. So Mitch from VC will be abstaining. And with that, that has been passed. We'll move on to the regular agenda, item 6A. So this is an ad hoc committee report on the selection of the general manager. So the ad hoc committee has interviewed candidates, and we are in the process of making an offer and negotiating a contract. And we expect that we will be providing that to you at the June board meeting. It's not scheduled yet, and Jim Shetler will be addressing that in his interim GM report. We'll be asking for a special meeting to update you in June. So that's part 1 of, and thank you for the ad hoc committee for spending time in reviewing resumes and asking the questions and selecting someone. So we're looking forward to bringing that recommendation and the contract to the board. There's another part to this, which is given that we will be bringing the recommendation for the interim general manager, the next interim general manager, only in the middle of June. We'd like to extend Jim Shetler's agreement, which was supposed to end May 31 with transition services in June. We'd just like to push that a month to extend his contract through the end of June with transition services through July. And with that, I will ask Jim, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we go to questions from the board?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
I'd be happy to move the resolution.
Okay, thank you. So do we have a second?
I'll second, Barbara Hill.
Great. So with that, we have a motion second. I'm going to go to the public and ask if there are any comments from the public on this matter.
No hands raised, Chair.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to the board. Any further discussion? Not seeing any raised hands. Let's take a vote on this.
Mr. Chairman, we have resolution 210511, extension of the contract with Adirondack Power Consulting for interim general manager services. Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy. Absent, I believe. Marin Clean Energy,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power,
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution is approved.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6B, it's the ad hoc committee report on selection of general counsel. There is a staff report attached to your packet. I wanted to also thank SPC's general counsel, who played quite a role in the negotiation of the contract, etc. But the ad hoc committee interviewed 2 firms, and we are pleased to recommend Braun and Blazing as our general counsel. Attached to the resolution is the contract that will extend through December of this year, and the dollars associated with the contract reflect the approved budget that you have passed last month. With that, any questions from the board? Okay. I'll entertain, oh, yes, Barbara?
In looking at in the packet material, I didn't see how conflicts of interest would be addressed. Perhaps I missed it, but I'd be interested in hearing what the expectation is there.
Greg, do you want to address this?
Yes, I would. Under the contract, there cannot be any conflicts of interest by Braun Blazing, and if there was going to be a conflict, they would have to come to the board for a waiver of the conflict, and that'd be in the discretion of the board. And if the board did not approve the conflict, then they would have to then deal with that issue to avoid the conflict with their duties as general counsel.
Thank you.
One quick question, if I might, too. It's only a contract through the end of this year. That seems like a pretty short period of time. Any thoughts on that?
The idea behind that was that it was tied into the fiscal year, and it was pretty typical with JPA general counsel contracts to make them run yearly, but renewable for each fiscal year. And at that point in time, if there's any change in budget, that could be adjusted at that point in time for the following fiscal year.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Tom.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Matthew. I'll go over to our public comment and see if there's any public comment on item 6B.
No hands raised, Chair.
Bring it back to the board for further discussion. Not seeing any hands raised. Let's go to a vote.
Resolution 210512, approval of agreement with BBSW for general counsel services. Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy is absent. Marin Clean Energy,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power,
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution carries.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn it over to Jim Shetler to address item 6C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I thought I'd open up and the discussion on the Policy Development Ad Hoc Committee. And then obviously any of the committee members that wish to chime in can do so. From a staff perspective, we have been very focused since the last meeting on implementing the procurement conditions that the board approved for the LDS project, making sure they're properly documented in the agreements that are going out and addressing that as we move forward with shortlisting on those projects. So we haven't spent a lot of time on looking at general policy development at this stage. We are continuing to look at the comments that we've received from the public. Have had a chance to have some email exchange with the ad hoc committee. The other factor that I've talked to both the chair and the committee members on is the fact that we will be looking at a transition of interim general managers in the late June, July timeframe. And I think there's a consensus that it would be good to allow the incoming interim general manager an opportunity to weigh in and have a chance to look at and advise the board on the policies before we finalize them. So we're factoring that into our process as well. And with that, I will turn it over to the members of the ad hoc committee to see if they have any comments they wish to add.
Not seeing any at this point. Let me ask if there are any comments from the public on this update.
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you. There is no action here. I'll now move to item 6D and turn it over to Tony Braun, our new general counsel, to introduce this item.
Mr. Chairman, we've been fortunate to work with the Project Oversight Committee to develop the agreement that's before the board today. It's really a successor agreement to the members that have been participating already in the long duration storage solicitation that pre-exists CC Power's formation. The cost sharing agreement that's before the board really mirrors the existing agreement that was in place when the members were self-administering the solicitation process. It addresses two things. One, it addresses the fact that CC Power is now administering the process with the support of its members. And two, that we are now into phase two, what we're calling phase two, which is the actual negotiation phase for the shortlisted developers that will be considered for potential commercial agreements with CC Power. So the agreement does several things. One, it creates a not to exceed amount, both with respect to the aggregate expenditures as part of this phase two process, but also for the individual shares. It includes the individual shares that have been provided to us by the members as far as participation percentages. It contains the obligations of the members and CC Power as far as appropriately and responsibly running the solicitation and negotiation process. And it has very important confidentiality provisions to recognize that the materials that are being shared during this process are in part confidential materials, and we have an expectation that they won't be shared outside the parameters of what's contained in this agreement. So again, I would emphasize it really mirrors in large part the agreement that the members already had that predates CC Power, and we would recommend your adoption of it today. Happy to answer any questions.
I got one.
Go ahead, Tom.
Under item number 3, the aggregated not to exceed, you saying the parties agreed that the aggregated cost shall not exceed certain amount unless or without written consent of the parties. And again, the parties further agreed that each party's individual amount shall not exceed amount set forth without the express written consent of the parties. Again, plural, not singular. Seems to me that if a party doesn't want its share to exceed a certain amount for whatever the reason may be, then they have to be the one to consent, not all the parties. Am I correct, Tony, or am I seeing this differently?
So, Director Habashi, there's no really clean. This is a multi-party agreement. There's no way to really cleanly segregate the individual obligations of the party. We were anticipating that we would be revisiting the cost sharing and other things if there were changed circumstances that would necessitate that. And so there is a little bit of a element of all for one, one for all here. And so, the impact of one party's change, generally speaking, flows back through everyone. And so that's really the structure we were anticipating.
Let me try this again. If one party at one point or another during the process decided, I'm not going to proceed any further for whatever the reason may be, and then collectively all the parties come together and say, we need to add more money into this agreement because we haven't finished the negotiations, or how would that party then be able to get out? Because this says that the collective, that all the parties can come together and say, we're going to raise the ante up for everybody. And you, party A, whether you like it or not, whether you don't want to be part of the process or not, you still have to pay into that. So I have no problem with the initial not to exceed amount. I get that, regardless of when party A decides to bail out. It is the increase in their participation percentage, even though they don't want to be part of the process anymore.
So if there was someone that didn't want to be part of the process anymore, then we would take the necessary steps to remove them from the agreement. So then for any future changes to the amounts, then theirs would not be affected. But I would add, just to make sure, there is an element here where you are committing to the phase 2 process, right? And I think, we can assess these things moving forward, but this is a firm commitment by the signatories to this agreement to the phase 2 process. And if there was a changed circumstance in the middle of the phase 2 process, the way I understand what the members have been discussing is that the parties would still be obligated for the amounts and the responsibilities in the agreement until they were no longer party to it.
I'm not questioning that. Up to the not to exceed amount stipulated here in Exhibit A.
Yeah.
It is for the additional amount
that
the parties may come back and say, we need to exceed, or we need to push some more money into this, into these negotiations. I don't think you intend or want to promote the idea that it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. At that point, you're committed to additional amount of money if that were to be agreed to by the parties, or are you?
No, you're not. You are not bound by those additional amounts. That needs further consent.
Is there anything in this contract that that allows for that, Tony? I mean, for a single party to terminate but can remain obligated to the not to exceed amount in Exhibit A.
I believe there is. I'm sorry.
If not, I was going to suggest that you need to add one.
So that the obligations, I believe there is, Director Habashi, and maybe there's other questions. I'll go back, but there's, I think we've articulated that, the remaining obligations of the parties remain obligated, irrespective of their, the changed circumstances. But let me go back as I'm considering this and try to answer your question to see if there's other things that are out there.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
other questions? Yep. Barbara?
First of all, I wanted to say thank you for the care in incorporating the language that San Francisco requested. I appreciate that in the agreement. I think the resolution has just a simple error in the fourth whereas, where the language included talks about fulfill the objections. I believe that's supposed to be objectives as opposed to objections. I just would like to have that clarified, please.
Good.
Yes, I believe that's correct. It should be objectives.
Thank you. Further questions from board members before we go to public comment? And I do see one hand up. And then we can come back for Tony to maybe address Tom's question a little bit more before we consider whether we'll consider a motion. Okay, let's get to public comment.
Thank you, Chair. As you mentioned, we have one hand raised, and that is Rick Bonilla.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Andrea. I am Rick Bonilla. I'm a member of the Board of Directors at Peninsula Clean Energy and also a member of the Executive Committee there. In talking with some of my fellow members of the board there, from time to time we have questions. As you may know, initially we had a little bit of a time getting our head around the entire joint JPA concept, but we got there and we're here. We're happy to be members. But we have a question. Somehow we would like to understand a little bit about what we're investing in. Question might be, and I know we're talking about shortlisting now, so I guess most of the proposers have been eliminated, but we'd like to know who the proposers are and try to have some idea maybe what the technologies are that are being proposed, some idea about possible locations, you know, and interested in discussing that. If there is information that we might be able to get, that's what we'd like to know so that we can discuss amongst ourselves and feel comfortable with what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment, Andrea?
I see no additional hands raised.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring it back. Tony, is there anything else you want to add related to Tom Habashi's question?
There isn't right now, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to opportunity perhaps follow up with Mr. Habashi. I don't believe that I believe that the agreement as he articulated is what is included in here, but I don't feel like I'm doing a thorough job in describing it to him. If there is a fundamental disagreement on the intent of this, then we can follow up with that as appropriate. But I think I would appreciate the opportunity to have a specific discussion and make sure that I'm understanding the question he's raising.
I think it could be resolved really easily if we just have a provision in this contract that says any party or any signatory to this agreement may terminate or can terminate the participation. However, the obligation remains as shown in Exhibit A, and they will continue to pay up to the 56,000 or whatever, at least for us, but not have any additional obligation, and still have that obligation to pay that up to that amount. So they're not off the hook, so to speak, just because they decided to forego continuation of participation in this project. And I'm sure Tony can articulate it a whole lot better in one sentence but I think it's needed there because right now I don't see that as a possibility. I see that you could decide to terminate and you still be obligated to pay not just what's in Exhibit A, but more if the group decides that they will spend a little bit more on negotiations.
I may just say, Tom, that sounds fair, that we can demarcate that where I think by agreeing to be part of phase 2, we are obligated for the number that we have right now. But you're talking about if you decide to terminate, you shouldn't be obligated for any additional costs that the phase 2 participants decide we want to increase. So you want your liabilities limited. So
yes,
yeah. I'm thinking about a way to do this, Tony, because I think it's in our interest to get this phase 2 agreement memorialized. So should we try this with an amendment here or an agreement to approve this as is and come back with an amendment at the next month's meeting?
I was wondering, Mr. Chairman, maybe if we could table this item, allow me to give my update, allow Tony a chance to think about some language, and then maybe come back to see if we couldn't resolve it with an amendment today. Does that work? Tony, are you willing to do that?
I am. If the board is comfortable with that approach, you know, I think that Director Habashi has articulated something that's reasonable and also what was the intent of the parties. And I don't think crafting the language is difficult. I just want to make sure that the board is comfortable with that approach.
And just so I'm clear, I wasn't suggesting we come back later today, as in during the meeting.
So Jim's saying he's going to speak very slowly
I
for
am,
his GM report.
until I see a thumbs up from my general counsel. But anyway, yes.
Okay, so Tony, what do we do to table an item for a few, like 5-10 minutes? What do I have to do that?
I don't think any action is necessary. We'll come back.
We'll just come back. Okay, thank you. So we'll move now to the general manager, item 6E, interim general manager's report, and we will return to item 6D after 6F. So we'll do 6E, 6F, and then come back to 6D. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chris, could you pull up the slides, please? Thank you. So I do have a relatively brief general manager's update for the board. Next slide, please. So 2 areas, a couple administrative items I want to update the board on. And then I thought I'd do an overview of the LDF project, current status. So next slide, please, Chris. So 2 quick administrative items. We still have the conflict of interest code to approve. However, it is still in review at the Secretary of State's office. They acknowledge they have received it and it's in their process. But at this stage, we do not have a firm date on when it will be coming back. So as soon as we know that and whether there's any comments or not, we will let the board know, and that'll be brought forward to the appropriate board meeting for approval. And then earlier in the meeting, the chair did mention a need for a June board meeting. We had not scheduled one. We are looking at planning for one on same time frame, 1 o'clock on Wednesday, June 16th. And under the current process we have, the general counsel can go ahead and notice that without the board having to go through a formal approval. The process does allow for that to happen. And at this stage, there are 2 items that I'm aware of that we would need to talk about at the June meeting. One would be approval of the contract for the new interim general manager. And then again, I think it would be appropriate to do an update on the LDF project. We should have some more movement going on and can update the board on that. So those are the two administrative items I wanted to cover. Next slide, please. So on the LDS project, I wanted to update the board. We have finalized the short list of projects for the LDS project. We have notified the finalists and the developers, and also those that did not meet the short list. In accordance with the board's authorization for this, this was reviewed with the ad hoc advisory committee, which is the chair and vice chair, and they concurred with the recommendations that we made. We do have multiple projects. Some are what I would call proven technology, some are emerging technologies. And the list that we've come up with more than covers the capacity needs that the members have identified. So we should not have a problem meeting those needs based on what comes out of, assuming what comes out of the negotiations are acceptable contracts. I know there's been interest expressed about releasing the projects and the developer names. From our perspective, we think it's premature to do so until we've completed negotiations. So at this stage, we're not planning on releasing the information publicly. Obviously, this information has been shared with the Project Oversight Committee. And so each one of the members is aware of the results of the shortlisting. As far as near-term next steps, we will be sending the non-disclosure agreement and the exclusivity agreement along with a draft of the storage services agreement to the shortlisted developers over the next week. We will be within the next 2 weeks initiating discussions with the shortlist developers. And as those evolve, those will lead into detailed negotiations. And assuming the general counsel is successful in his wording project that he's working on right now, and the board approves the phase 2 cost sharing agreement, then we would execute that as well with the participants over the next 2 weeks. A couple other items relative to the LDS project. We have a draft project participation agreement that's been shared with the Project Oversight Committee. And we're initiating the review of that. This will run in parallel with negotiations and the development of the operating agreement. And the operating agreement is envisioned to have a draft out probably by late June. We do anticipate this will be a bit of an iterative process between negotiations, what we discuss among the members relative to the participation agreement, and the development of the operating agreement. So it'll be a bit dynamic over the next several months as we work our way through this. And then the other thing we'll be doing this week is updating the Project Oversight Committee on their role relative to the negotiating process now that we're entering to that. And basically, as we have talked about several times with the board, we view the Project Oversight Committee's role as one is a communication channel, two-way between CC Power and the individual members and back, and being a sounding board and advisory group to myself and the negotiating team on the negotiating process. Next slide, please. A little longer term, right now, the plan for this effort was assumed that we would be in negotiations through the August-September timeframe, and with the goal of having final agreements by September. Under our requirements, those would get posted for a 60-day notice. But also on the assumption was that we would not be executing agreements until the end of the year. We didn't recognize up front that the members would have to go through their individual approval processes in order to be able to commit to participation in the whatever project we come forward with. And the expectation that we would not be entering into final agreements and executing those agreements until the end of the year. And I believe that's the last slide. So any questions from the board? Hearing none, Mr. Chairman, I can turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. And I have a hand raised in the public side for public comment on this item, I believe. Andrea?
Yes, James Ruigomez. Whenever you're ready.
All righty. Good evening. Good afternoon, I should say, Chairman and honorable members of the JPA. My name is James Ruigomez. I'm with the San Mateo Building and Construction Trade Council, representing 24 construction unions, 16,000 highly skilled men and women, speaking on behalf of the regional building trade construction councils, representing approximately 100,000 members in your service area. I would like to know about your long-term labor standards, which I believe you covered earlier in this presentation. However, I would like to make a comment about the short list of developers and contractors that you refuse to give to the public here at this meeting. This is a public meeting for public to view which contractors and which developers you guys are looking to procure your agreements with. And there is some public transparency that needs to happen at these meetings. And you're sharing it with the board of directors. It's going to eventually be public knowledge of who those are. And I don't understand why you wouldn't share that short list of developers and proposers that you guys have in place now. It seems to me that this is, again, a public meeting. There needs to be transparency by this JPA. And we'd appreciate it if, I would appreciate it if you would share that list with us in labor and be totally transparent in these meetings. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I really do appreciate all your time and look forward to continue to watch. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And up next, looks like we have Rick Bonilla who would like to speak. And when you're ready, Rick.
I think I'm ready. Thank you for hearing me once again. With regards to what Mr. Ruigomez brought up, which was my question, I understand after Mr. Shetler's report that there's no intention to disclose shortlisted proposers at this time. But my question is why? Could somebody please explain why? Thank you.
Any other public comment?
I see no additional hands raised, Chair.
Okay. So I'm going to bring it back to the board. And typically when we have public comment, we don't necessarily have to engage in a back and forth with the public as part of public comment. But I am going to use my prerogative to ask Tony to address this at a high level with the board and address the board, please. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We have received requests for information regarding identity of bidders, and I suspect other information. This solicitation is extraordinarily technical, as we've gone through in prior meetings. There is quite a bit of site-specific qualitative information that is highly sensitive, and it's not nearly as simple as boiling it down to simply price. The value and the valuation process of these projects is highly sensitive to location and also the topography of the transmission network, and to identify the specific projects or even the identities of the developers, which in sometimes actually would reveal the specific project, would be revealing the identity of the bidders to each other. And we believe that that is not in the interests of CC Power or its members' customers. And moreover, it is appropriate and lawful to keep that information confidential. I would note that we have an extended process for approval of any project agreements. And moreover, our understanding of the members' individual approval processes, as these will as the supporting participation agreements will be going back to the members through the members' approval processes. So there will be quite a bit of public vetting on all these, but when we're in the heart of the negotiations, identifying the bidders' identities to each other is highly sensitive information and would put us at a commercial disadvantage.
Thank you, Tony, for addressing the board on this issue. Any questions from the board on the interim general manager's report? Okay, thank you. Not seeing any. I'm going to, unless Tony tells me he's ready to come back to item 6D.
I am ready. I have a question, but I am ready, and I have language that I would propose to add to section 8 if appropriate.
Let's go back to item 6D now.
So as I looked at the language, Director Habashi, I think I better explain to myself why the language reads as is, and let me start with that and let me move into the explanatory language. So the participation in the phase 2 process here doesn't anticipate termination of a member's participation in the process for the pendency of it. It's not a long process. It's not anticipated to be long, and everyone is committed up to their not to exceed amounts. So I think that explains partially why the and everyone cannot be bound to pay increased amounts without their consent. So we didn't really anticipate termination in the middle of this process by an individual member that's agreed to sign this document. So I think that's a little explanation as to why that is included. But I did craft language, and let me know if this meets the indicated concern here. So what I would propose to add to the end of section 8 would be the following language. An indicated member, and that's a defined term in the contract, may cease to participate in the ongoing activities described in this agreement, but shall remain bound to pay the amounts up to its not to exceed amount, but in no event be required to pay increased amounts irrespective of the agreement of the remaining parties to do so.
For me. Thanks, Tony.
Let me ask the board now to see if they have any questions on that amended language or anything else on item 6D. Not seeing any, maybe I'll entertain a motion for approval of item 6D.
I'll move approval as amended.
Thank you. Second.
I'll second. This is Jan.
Thank you, Jan. I'll go over to public for comment on item 6D.
No hands raised, Chair.
I'll bring this back to the board. Any further discussion? Okay, let's go to vote.
Resolution 210513, approval of long duration storage phase 2 cost sharing agreement, 3CE.
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco.
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy is absent. Marin Clean Energy.
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy.
EBC is present. I just signed in, and I'll vote yes.
So noted. And was that an aye vote, Director Chaset?
Aye.
Marin Clean Energy.
Aye.
Peninsula Clean Energy.
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority.
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy.
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority.
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy.
I'll abstain. VCE is not a part of the agreement.
The resolution carries and the agreement is approved as amended.
Okay, thanks a lot and appreciate the amendments on your feet, Tony. And thanks for bringing that up, Tom. We'll now move to item 6F, which is discussion of any individual member items that you would like us to consider in the future, or just any updates you may have. Open it up for the directors.
Garish, this is Nick. I guess I just wanted, I'm sorry I joined late here, but I did follow much of the conversation around LDS. And I guess I just had maybe a request for a subsequent meeting in light of the questions that we got from the public around shortlisting. At least at East Bay Community Energy, we have a pretty clear policy, and I would imagine many of us do, so maybe this is worth bringing back, around making shortlists for any contracts. It's very standard for every CCA I've interacted with to keep the shortlisting process confidential because of the market sensitive nature of those contracts, and only after contracting is completed to share publicly who bidders are. And so it certainly, if there are other CCs who routinely share their shortlists, I'd be interested in knowing that. That's not a policy that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Nick. What I'll do is I'll punt this over to the Project Oversight Committee, and maybe we can collect some information on that. I just know from my own experience at SBCE, we do exactly what you have described, which is we do not make public the shortlist. Okay, thank you. Other input from the board on any future project ideas or anything else? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just wanted to note to the board that I have been keeping track of the suggestions and ideas that the board has come up with over the last couple of meetings. And when I send out the update report from this meeting, I'll attach that for your information. And we'll try to keep a running track of that. And at some point, I imagine that would be fodder for a good strategic planning session.
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate that.
Garish, if you don't mind,
yeah.
Since I didn't participate on the last sort of blue sky discussion about that, appreciate the feedback from the other board members. Maybe Jim, if appropriate, could add in a large-scale demand response related to agricultural pumping in the Central Valley, as well as HVAC load in the Central Valley, being two potential items to consider.
Right. We'll add that to the list. And Mitch, just on PDF page 8, there's a list from the minutes of the previous ideas that were submitted, and we'll add yours to the list.
Thanks.
All right. Andrea, I believe we have public comment on this item.
Yes, we do. James Ruigomez. When you are ready.
Good afternoon again, James Ruigomez here. I've been listening to our local PCE meetings, and it's talked that if a entity wants to, doesn't like the developer or the policies of the developer, that they could opt out and not vote for a project. And now you guys are voting for a project blind. But I think that we have established labor policies for this LDS, and those will be in effect for this project, and that we are not, our CEO for Peninsula Clean Energy is not voting on a project without knowing the details of the project, the location of the project, and whether or not the labor policies are going to be followed. So I just wanted to make that as public record, public comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James. And Chair, I see no other hands raised for this item.
Well, if there is nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting at 1:51 p.m. Thank you all for your attendance.